The Holy Gospel according to St. John, the 13th chapter. Now before the festival of the Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The devil had already put it into the heart of Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, to betray him. And during supper, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going to God, got up from the table, took off his outer robe, and tied a towel around himself. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet, and to wipe them with the towel that was tied around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus answered, "You do not know what now I am doing, but later you will understand." Peter said to him, "You will never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, and you have no share with me." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head." Jesus said to him, "One who has bathed does not need to wash except for the feet, but is entirely clean. And you are clean, though not all of you." For he knew who was to betray him. For this reason he said, "Not all of you are clean." After he had washed their feet and put on his robe and had returned to the table, he said to them, "Do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for that is what I am. So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have set you an example, that you also should do as I have done to you. Very truly I tell you, servants are not greater than their master, nor are messengers greater than the one who sent them. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them. Now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him. If God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and will glorify him at once. Little children, I am with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and as I said to the Jews, so I now say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Long ago, after walking in simple sandals all day long and walking along often unpaved country roads or perhaps dusty footpaths, by the end of the day, your feet were pretty grimy. So it was customary when you showed up as a guest at someone's house, it was customary for them to provide you with some water to wash your feet, or if that person's very wealthy, for a servant or a slave to stoop down and wash your feet for you. Now, the disciples were very ordinary people who probably seldom, if ever, were guests at a wealthy home, and so they may never have even had a servant stoop down and wash their lowly feet. And that made the fact that Jesus, their friend and teacher, stooped down to wash their feet, that made that all the more shocking. In their eyes, he was their master, he was their teacher, and he was their Lord, and not some lowly servant or slave. But that's really part of the heart of the good news of Jesus Christ that continues to shock people even today. We have a Lord who not only has been raised to glory, but first, Jesus was a lowly servant who washed feet and then became the very lowest of the low. The God who in human flesh allowed himself to be handed over to death like a criminal and to be put to death on the cross. And here's the thing. On Maundy Thursday, not only do we remember that Jesus washed his disciples' feet, but we also remember that Jesus commanded his disciples to wash one another's feet. That is, Jesus commanded us to be servants to each other and servants to the world. So as you are either watching this on video or reading this as a document, I ask you now to take a moment and take off your shoes, take off your socks, take off even your slippers, and look at your feet. Go ahead. Get barefoot and wiggle your toes. Now, I have two questions to ask you to think about. First, where have your feet taken you during this past week as you have tried to live out your life as a disciple of the servant Christ who has called us to serve each other and to serve all the people of the world? And the second question is this: where will or might your feet take you in the coming week as a servant of the servant Christ who calls you to serve your neighbor? Think about the past week and think about the next week for a moment. This time of coronavirus is a time of extremes in lives of service to our neighbors. Some of us are serving others by caring for the sick or the vulnerable and perhaps putting our own health and our lives on the line. Still others of us are stocking shelves and checking out groceries so that we might have food and, yes, even toilet paper. And still many others of us, we aren't walking very far at all. We are staying at home. And our Apple Watches and our Fitbits aren't logging many steps unless we intentionally take lonely walks or do the treadmill. But using some of this time at home for prayer and reaching out by telephone or doing school or work or even church, by email, by Facebook, by Zoom, doing that in our homes right now, not putting in our steps in this strange time is also a vital way to serve our neighbors. Long ago, Jesus lowered himself to act less like a teacher, to act less like a master, and to act much less than the Lord, the Son of God. Jesus did that in order to show the disciples then and us now that the crucified and soon-to-be risen Christ came to serve and to call each of us into different paths of service. Amen.